everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Unscripted and Unchoreographed. I am your host, Niamh, the actor.
I'm your other host, Sarah, the dancer.
And we are very, very lucky to have a wonderful artist in today.
My name is Jeffrey Gormly. I'm a writer and producer across dance, theatre, and collective social processes in the community and in organisation.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on today, Jeffrey. We're very excited to talk to you. And I suppose to start off, how did you get involved in the arts? Was it in your family? Did you always know in school you wanted to go into the arts, or was it possibly later in life you found a love for it?
Well, it's not in my family, really in my community as I grew up. I had very limited experience with the arts, but I read a lot and I listened to music. That was the same as a lot of people around me. Music was a big part of all of our lives. And I read a lot from a very young age, really enjoyed reading, and I knew that I could identify with the fact that books were made by somebody, I suppose. I was always quite interested in books as artifacts, I suppose, and I was aware that there was a process of books being made somehow. I was aware of that. I spent a lot of time in the library. I used to like browsing for books. I used to like comic books. So yeah, I think really that was the core of my creative experience, as well as just enjoying being a child, playing, connecting to the world around me, and being quite curious and bright. And I just enjoyed music. I enjoyed TV shows. I enjoyed kind of creative things like the Muppets and that kind of thing. I enjoyed that kind of fun, chaotic, creative vibe. And then I guess when I got into my teens, I started to identify with musical artists more than just music. People like Prince, later the Pixies, and that kind of thing. So I started to recognize that there were people who had an individual take on things, and music in particular at the time. I suppose artists seemed to me like people who had a life that was outside of the normal life that everybody was living. They were kind of living a different life. They were rebels, they were um, risk takers, they were adventurous, they did crazy things, were living an adventurous life. All of that stuff was how I kind of, it was I think, the art paradigm of that time in the 80s. And artists were rebels and they were exceptional, and yeah, they were a kind of a counter to the norm. And like I did grow up in the 80s and the later 70s, and so there was very much a norm around me, and art was outside of that. So, and I craved for something outside the norm. I found the norm pretty boring and cloying and claustrophobic. So, art attracted me as an obvious kind of escape from having to live a normal life, which looked pretty dull to me. Yes, so they were the early roots of it.
Do you think, Jeffrey, it's important for artists of any genre or in any capacity in the industry to be rebels? Do you think that's an important thing?
Well, I don't think rebel means what it used to mean. Like when I was younger, there was a clear mainstream and there was a clear alternative. And so it was kind of easy to be part of the alternative. Like we had alternative music, we had indie music, we had indie charts, we had rebellious writers, like punk writers. We had like punk happened in the 70s. I was only a child, so I didn't experience it, but that kind of era had happened. And even things like the surrealists and like 20th century art seems to be like it was quite a lot about breaking norms and stuff like that. But we're not in that world anymore. Like we're not in a norm world versus alternative. It's not a polarized world in that sense anymore. It's a really like my daughter doesn't differentiate between indie music and mainstream music. Like she doesn't really have any awareness of the back end of how music gets made. She just listens to what she listens to from whatever era, from whatever kind of artist or genre. And I think that's kind of typical of the world we're in. Like it's a much more diverse world. There's no real mainstream anymore. As well, like rebellion is can be a gesture that doesn't really mean anything, or it can be just a personal gesture as opposed to a kind of a systematic um, position or approach to the world or whatever. Like I don't think. I think sticking to your guns is important. I think um, sticking to like defending or protecting or really digging into your process, whatever that is, or as you discover it, or your process of discovering what your process is or what your thing is. That's important. It's important to resist some of the influences that come from outside sometimes. It's certainly important to keep the space of your artistic process, kind of keep that space open, keep it alive, and that can be hard for all kinds of reasons. And that can require determination, stubbornness, orneriness, contrariness. I think as well, like an artist in the sense of somebody who has really got their own thing to say and really needs to say it in their own way, which is kind of how I would describe an artist. Like really feels that they have to kind of get it out in a particular way and have to keep searching for that way until they find it. That's a kind of a that's a very strong mentality that that needs to be stuck with to do that. That can take a long time to happen. To feel like you're saying things you wanted to say them and finding the medium or the genre or the context in which you feel like you're communicating that and you feel like somebody's receiving it. That can be a pretty long road and tends to be an individual road. It's your own journey. So you got to be up for that.
So you as a young person, you were reading a lot, and in school, how was school for you? Did you enjoy it? Did you feel like there was a lot of access to the arts in school, or
And no, there wasn't. Not in my school. I went to a rural school again, like in the 80s. We didn't have an art room. We didn't have art class. It was a pretty narrow educational point of view, I would say. I think I only saw one play before I left secondary school, and maybe two. I'd been to quite a few gigs, like books, TV, music. They were our windows into the world of art. There was no real experience of it. I mean, I didn't know anybody who, well, actually, somebody like a second cousin painted, and he was into jazz as a hobby. I wasn't really aware of the world of art. I didn't connect with it. I didn't come from a family where that's what people did. I had no conception of what it was to actually for that to be your job or your way of life. Um, so no, I had no experience of it at all.
so then how after school how did you get into the arts, I suppose? Did you study it in college, or was it something that just happened?
Yeah, I think well a little bit of both. I studied English. I studied an arts degree in UCD, um, which was a good education. It wasn't a very artistic education, but um, after a good while of kind of trying to find my way in university and trying to find some people I could connect with, and also being quite unwell in terms of mental health. I had a bit of a crisis, and at around that time, somebody I'd started to make friends with was putting on a play in Dramsoc, the Drama Society, and he was somebody who did have artists in his sphere. He had a different kind of upbringing to me in some ways, and he was putting on a play by a reasonably well-known writer who we knew personally. He was a friend of the family's or something. So anyway, I said I'd give him a hand, and I did, and I found that a kind of a context that I could get on in. There was a lot of people milling around. It was very easy to offer to help out and do something. I like helping out. I find it a good way of socializing, really. it was a familiar way for me from my childhood. I was always helping my dad with stuff. I would help out people generally. I kind of like helping out, still do. I find it satisfying, and like I say, I find it an easier way to get to know people and to make connections and stuff. So I just started helping out on things, and I found that the world of theatre was really accessible in that way, in that there was always in the drum sock there was always somebody needed help with something. There's always something to paint or lift or go and get or whatever. And so I could make myself busy quite a lot, and I got to meet a lot of people that way. And then I found I had a bit of a flair for it. I think that would be my first artistic kind of awakening. And I had been writing poems and stuff like that. And I did kind of consider myself a writer or have a kind of a writing ambition of some kind or identification. I didn't really think of that as artistic in a funny way. Whereas in the theatre, I found I had a flair, an understanding for how things worked in the rehearsal room and how things worked on the stage. I could kind of understand the beats of a show, and I really found that I was very drawn to it. And I also could exercise my love of music. I was really interested in design. I liked working with people. I liked being part of a team. I'd always been on team sports. So the theatre was just great that way. It was a real multifaceted experience of the creative process. So that was I really immersed myself in that for 3 or 4 years. And out of that came something like a career in theatre as a very young person. And then that, because I got a bit kind of serious about that, or thought, well, if I'm going to be serious about this, I should really understand it. Then I started kind of doing my own kind of artistic research into things like design and set design, but ritual and trance and sociology and languages, all kinds of stuff that I felt were relevant to why theatre was an important activity culturally, not just as an artistic thing. Like I was interested in what you could do with theatre that made a difference to the world. So yeah, so I had a bit of a flair for the theatre, and I got some opportunities outside of university to develop a bit of a professional life in the theatre. And then and then around that time I started developing this kind of self-directed research, which is still a kind of a core part of my artistic life today, which until then, but that was the first time it really came out, where I was like, I'm going to take this seriously. So I really want to understand what theatre is, um, what the roots of it are, what the social, because it was clear there was a social function. So I was looking at myth and ritual and design and art, architecture, planning, sociology, all kinds of stuff.
UCD has an incredible drama sock still to this day. Like it's amazing. It's just interesting to me that you were writing before drama sock, but that didn't feel as artistic maybe as what you felt in drama sock. Is that correct?
I don't know what that is, and it's interesting now as a writer, like writing and theatre would be my core competencies, I would say. Um, and I think of my writing very much as a craft. I do a lot of writing in service to other people. Like I do a lot of funding application writing. I do a lot of like even business plans, strategy things. I do a really diverse kind of writing stuff, and I think of my writing really like a trade, like a craft or a trade, like as something I can just do and that I've built up a lot of experience and skill in. But I used to, but not as much now. I don't think of my writing as self-expression, if you know what I mean. I don't really I don't really go about expressing myself that much in my art anymore. I tend to kind of be looking for contexts where what I do is useful, um, either to the community or to other artists. A lot of my writing in the dance world is trying to help to to kind of expand the scope of dance and the usefulness of dance to people. I also edit quite a lot. I edit other people writing and often write people who aren't as familiar with writing as I am. So yeah, I think I just think of writing as a trade, a craft, and less I'm interested in personal expression as my art thing. That was very much what I was doing in the beginning because I had a lot to get off my chest. But once I became a reasonably well-rounded person, which was which took a while, uh, I I found that it was more about what I could communicate that I thought was important rather than revealing or like things about me or whatever.
That's really interesting and probably happens for a lot of artists and actually makes a lot of sense when you say it. And out of curiosity, Jeffrey, do you find, in your own personal opinion, there's a big difference between the theatre world and the dance world?
Oh, look, it's all show business, you know. So it's got a lot more in common than it has in terms of difference, I think. The kind of dance that I prefer or that I lean towards is not the kind of dance that tells a story. It's not dance theater or it's not narrative. It's more it's a different order of things, and I do think in those terms that kind of dance does something that theater doesn't do really. That kind of dance expresses or embodies something that the theater kind of is a more formal version of. Like when I think about it, like I think a lot about politics as well around dance and theater, and like the politics that we know now is a representative politics, and it's theatrical, and like our religions are theatrical. You have ceremonies, you have set procedures, you have people who represent either groups of people or who represent God or whatever it is, and they and go through these rituals or these formulas or these kind of routines. A lot of it's kind of scripted, and it's kind of formalized. Whereas when it comes to dance, that I'm interested in is the kind of dance that isn't formalized and is kind of a creative state where there's more freedom than that, and where things can happen rather than what happens is what's scripted, if you know what I mean. And when I often I think about, I'm very interested in learning as part of my artistic practice, and most artists I know who've been around for any length of time are learners, they're researchers, they're always adding skills, they're always looking into a new black hole or whatever to kind of explore something new. So learning is an important thing. And I look back when I look at small children and how they learn and how they play, and I look back then kind of at cultural learning, I see dance as kind of like free movement around the fire of the tribe or whatever. Like everybody just getting into their groove and doing their thing. Whereas I see theatre as that becoming formalized into roles or narratives or putting on a mask and telling a story. I see them as more formalized, more ritualized. Whereas dance I see as really an engine of freedom, creativity, and then that also applies to dance as just going out dancing, which has been a huge part of my life as well. Just going out dancing. And I don't really differentiate between dance, the art form, and dance, the life affirming activity, if you know what I mean. So they're the differences I would see. But putting on a dance show and putting on the theatre show, there's more in common. They have more in common than not. Um, but as art forms, I see them as in their spiritual core very different.
And in terms of your own experience of dancing, yeah, maybe if you'd like to share about that or the benefits of it.
It's something that I discovered in my teens and was kind of one of the first really freeing things. And actually, it was through the music of Prince. I went to a Prince concert down in Cork when I was about 15 or 16, and it was just a really funky concert. And I just couldn't stop dancing. I was just dancing, and like I'd never really danced before, and a lot of the people I were with were kind of a bit like, "The hell are you doing, man?" And I was like, "I can't help it. I'm just dancing." And I started to develop a real enjoyment of going to dancing and at the discos in college, dancing a lot and enjoying the freedom of it, like the really expressive, like and the physical freedom of it, because I've always loved sport. It was always a playing sport, practicing hurling or football or whatever, and or even just throwing a ball at each other. So I always really enjoyed as a pastime anything that was about using my body and kind of developing my body, developing skills, getting better at something, getting faster at something, being really alive in that way, and being able to catch a ball that was coming at you really hard. Um, so I think dance for me was like a kind of a at a time when I wasn't really playing sport was a real physical outlet for me. I love music, and then I encountered techno music kind of accidentally, and I found that really compelling. Again, just to dance to. And I started going out a lot, and in the 90s in Dublin there was a huge amount of dancing to be had. You could go out and dance every night of the week to good music, good DJs, to music that you hadn't heard before. There was a real appetite for new music at the time, and we were just discovering all the music that was kind of like the DJ culture had come in, rave and hip hop and stuff like that. But behind that was a huge amount of music that hadn't been on my radar and a lot of our radar, like jazz and soul and funk, and even going back to African music and Afrobeat or Kraftwerk or German stuff or whatever. There was just all this music that was coming through the music that the DJs were playing, and then they were digging, and all these record shops were opening, and like you could go to Chapters and find like 50 repressed Miles Davis records or whatever, and you'd be like finding that or Fela Kuti or whatever. So it was hugely exciting and creative, and there was just lots of opportunity to enjoy the music and to dance, and everybody was really into dancing. 10 years later, I got kind of invited into a dance company. It was like a weird fluke, but it was also brilliant because I love dancing, and I was in the company of all these amazing dancers who had a whole different approach to it, and who cultivated dance in themselves, who kind of got themselves dancing in these original ways because they were improvisers and were like highly trained, but they weren't working with set movement. So they had these really unusual mental stimuluses for getting themselves dancing. All these different kinds of prompts or images or tasks that they were doing that was getting their bodies to move in these really unique ways. And this was kind of like contemporary ballet, but really, really kind of highly improvised. And they were amazing dancers. Like some of the best dancers in Europe at the time were in this company in Limerick. Um, So that was really stimulating. And they also had this really radical notion about choreography, that choreography was a way of looking at the world. Choreography was kind of like seeing pattern in the world. Like the example I use a lot is that a baby has to learn how to compose a face. Like a baby doesn't see a mother's face. It takes about 6 months for the baby to kind of compose the face and see it as a face. Up to then, they're just seeing things kind of swimming in their field of vision, eyes or nose or ears or whatever. It takes about 6 months for them to compose that into a face. And that for me is a real clear metaphor for how creativity is kind of core aesthetics, and creativity and choreography in a sense is a kind of an organizational practice to how we compose the world. That we make sense of the world through our senses, but we make sense of the world by taking what comes in through our senses and putting pattern on it. Like we don't see just a bunch of like I'm looking at my window. I don't see just a bunch of twigs and branches. I see a tree. That's an act of composition for me to take all those lines and say that's a tree. That's a cultural form. That's a composition, and that's a creative thing. Now we do that all the time. Everybody is doing it all the time, and we're not thinking about it most of the time. But this radical idea that actually that's a creative act and that aesthetics is at the heart of how we organize the world means that art becomes a kind of a space and a vehicle for getting into the nuts and bolts of how we literally create the world together. And the implication is that then we can revise the world, we can recreate the world, we can co-create the world, we can continuously create the world. Again, to go back to that difference between dance and theatre. So if dance is like the kind of innocent, totally free, embodied, just bobbling along to the music kind of thing, and theatre is the kind of formal, ritualized formalization or kind of something development of that. Excuse me. Then it's almost like culture is the formalization of dance, of that dancey, lively stage where you could look at the tree and just see twigs. You could let your mind drop that category tree and just see all the twigs and just follow them and just go, what an amazing collection of lines. And artists do that when they draw. They try to see the lines. They don't try to just draw a tree from the mental concept. They try and look at all the lines and capture those lines. So that's what art does. It kind of goes inside the category that we've created, or the concept, and tries to see it fresh, and dances that freshness. So that's exciting culturally because it suggests that we could be dancing our way through the world. The world could be a state of dance just as much as it's a state of culture or theatre. So much of what we do is theatre. Like going to the shop is theatre. It's not dance. And going to the cafe is theatre. It's not dance. So these guys were really like, well, what if going to the cafe was dance? What would that cafe be like?
Jeffrey, jumping back to kind of what you said earlier about like the rave culture or kind of like dance culture, if you want, in Dublin or Ireland in the 1990s or 80s, do you think that is gone now, maybe after COVID, or I don't know, like have you any thoughts on that?
I couldn't really say, like, I mean, I'm at a different stage in my life, for one thing. I don't live in Dublin anymore, so I don't feel I can make the judgment. Definitely, like I would say, after 2000, there was a definite dip, and I also observed that the younger people, the people who were 5 or 10 years younger than my generation, were less interested in new music. Like we were mad for new music, and we could dance to anything, and we didn't need to hear it before. Whereas I clearly observed a generation come along that could only dance to music they knew. They seemed much more connected to the videos of the music, maybe, or something, I don't know. And their dance moves were very much the moves of people who watched people doing those moves in music videos. Maybe, I don't know. But like, we just had our own moves. And they weren't moves, they were just us with our elbows poking out and stuff. You know what I mean? We weren't like amazing dancers or anything. We just loved dancing, and we tried to dance with abandon, I suppose, to a greater or lesser degree. But definitely, I saw that changed. And then I saw it change again. And recently, when I do go to Dublin, I always look to see how many posters there are for things, gigs, shows, whatever. Like the 90s, there was a lot of space in Dublin. There was a lot more theatre. There was a lot of fly-by-night stuff. Nobody had any money, so it didn't matter that nobody was making any money. Things were cheap. There was lots of kind of dinky spaces everywhere that you could just get into. There was no fire officers. There was no insurance issues. So you could kind of rock up anywhere and put something on, and even if nobody came, it didn't cost you an arm and a leg. You could, get by on the dole. There was an awful lot of freedom, and also there was no social media or anything like that. So it was a very immediate kind of thing. Like you did stuff, people came, they thought what they thought, or you talked about it, or whatever. and then you moved on to the next thing. You weren't building a slide deck or an Instagram profile with this stuff. Do you know what I mean? We were just doing stuff, and everybody was doing stuff, and you were all going to each other's stuff. That was my experience. I don't know what it's like to be 20 something now in Dublin or anywhere else. I get the feeling it's a lot more, it's different. I don't get the feeling that there's as much freedom. Obviously, it's a lot more expensive to live in the cities. Like, for instance, one thing I really observe is that these days people look for funding to do stuff, and if they don't get the funding, they don't look anywhere else for money. They might still do it on their own back, but I don't see people looking for sponsorship or going around town looking for little ads for a program or whatever to get their show going. I don't see that. Like, I noticed that, for instance, is one thing. People are very reliant on funding to work. So yeah, in some ways, I would say it's become narrower. But again, look, I don't really know, and I don't. In other ways, like, there's so much more freedom today. Like, the diversity of identity that is open to everybody, means that people can really inhabit their bodies as they wish for the most part. So that's new. We had to fight for that. Now, that might have led to a lot of creativity at the same time, but we were also pretty repressed in a lot of ways. So look, I don't know where things are at that way. You know better than I do what it's like to be a young artist. I don't use the word industry. Like, to me, my life is my life. I don't think of my work as a career. I don't even think of maybe 10 years ago, I stopped using the words my work. I don't talk about my work very often. I talk about their work, and that's just whatever is on my plate. Like, I'm also a parent. I do other stuff that's not art that I need to do to keep a steady flow of money coming into the house. I also do voluntary things on committees, and I was very involved in my daughter's school at one stage. And I decided to call it all their work and to treat it all the same, to do it with the same kind of level of integrity, to do it, to follow my gut feeling about the right way to do it, or the best way to do it, or the way that had the most integrity, or that was kindest, or was the most useful, that was a good example to my daughter or to anybody else, and that my values were reflected in. So whether I was cooking dinner or dealing with the garden or dealing with the school or trying to do some art stuff, I decided eventually to try and do it all with the same approach. So that's kind of an ecological, low impact, light touch, minimal ego, helpful approach. So try and observe as much as possible. That's my practice, is like, try and observe what I'm trying to deal with. Try and figure it out as best I can before I do anything. Whatever I do, try and keep it light. Allow it to develop one step at a time. Make a light touch, see what happens, and then work with it. Work with things, not on things. Process is a living thing for me, and creative process and the processes of growth and the processes of nature and the seasons and all that stuff. They're all creative process to me. So treating it as I would treat a living thing is how I approach it. And then I also have to kind of make peace with it in terms of my family time, trying to get by financially. So, I mean, one thing I say to writers, and I'd say to any artist, is that, like, the only person who can decide you're a writer or anything else is you. And the only way to assert that identity is to practice it. That's my opinion anyway. Like, if you call yourself a writer, that's fine by me. But really, if you're calling yourself a writer, then I expect you to be writing, you know? And I don't care whether you're published or, what you do with the writing or who sees it or whether it's good, inverted commas, or any of that stuff. If you write, you're a writer. That's it. And you're the only one who can make that claim for yourself. And nobody can tell you you are, you aren't. Well, maybe somebody might kind of say to you, you are a writer. And that's nice to hear sometimes. But nobody can tell you aren't. So that's the first thing. To me, it's practice. And practice means doing it. Like, you practice something by doing it. So if you're going to have a creative practice, try and do it as much as you can. Stick to your guns. Know what's important to you, or find out what's important to you, or be on the search. Be looking out for the things that are important to you. You know, through things that give you pleasure, things that give you joy, things that give you satisfaction, things that make you curious, things that inspire you, things that make you want to be better at being an artist. They're your values, so keep an eye out for them, and you'll find them if you don't know what they are. And find the way that works for you. Like, you can work in a bank and be an artist if you want, or you can live in a hut in a field and just make art all the time if you want, if you can. Like, it's an ecological balancing thing. Like, I made a decision a long time ago that I didn't want to be an asshole artist who just did his art and let his wife run around and do everything else or whatever it was, which is what a lot of those 20th century icons were doing. So I wanted to be part of life, and I identify with like ordinary people. Like I say, I didn't grow up with artists. So I wanted to identify with ordinary people, and I wanted to connect. I wanted to make things, not all the time, but a lot, but I wanted to be able to make some things that they would be able to access, culturally, that weren't just kind of completely over their heads. So that ecology is for everybody to find for themselves. The balance of how you pay for it, or how much time you put into it, or how it goes along with the rest of your life and the other things you do to make it work. That's part of the art practice, is finding an art practice that you can sustain without making yourself or everybody else miserable, basically. And that's something you have to find for yourself as well. And don't be afraid for it to look the way it looks. Like, there's no shame in any configuration that works for you if it allows you to keep your practice up.
I know you mentioned it earlier, kind of in passing, the concept of ego in both forms or all forms of ego. What is your opinion, or how do you think artists can deal with ego? Because it does tend to come up in some form, whether you can learn to, as you say, balance with it, or yeah, I think maybe just your thoughts.
Yeah, well, like, you're struggling to even put the question together because it's a real humdinger, like, so um, it is a real, ego for me. I suppose as a younger person, it was all about my ego. It was all about me trying to assert myself, my identity, trying to look cool, trying to establish who I was, trying to get other people to buy into that, both for professional reasons and for personal reasons. Because I wanted people to think I was cool. I wanted girls and women to think I was cool. You know, I wanted to think I was cool. I wanted to think that. So, an ego is wrapped up in fears and, what would you say, our weaknesses, our flaws, the things that we haven't, the developmental bits that we missed out on for various reasons as children, our hang-ups and our baggage, all of that stuff are the things that we haven't figured out yet. And certainly I had a lot that I needed to figure out as a grown-up, because I wasn't very well equipped in terms of our culture at the time, didn't equip us to be emotionally intelligent or to be connected to our feelings or our bodies. So I had an awful lot of spade work I had to do on that front. And like I say, I had a mental health crisis as a young person, which really made it, really kind of brought that front and center, that I had to figure out a way of living that I could bear and that I could sustain. Because I'd found it very painful at times just being alive. And I'm sure that's the case for a lot of people today of all kinds of ages. So that was a big impetus for me as an artist, but not in terms of making work, or not just in terms of making work, but taking all that I learned from making art, all that stuff about process and ecology and the humility of just treating, what came on my plate as what needed to be done, and not, making claims for it. That was about finding a kind of a right way of living for me, not just about being an artist, but just about being a person who could sustain being alive, who could be there for other people in a meaningful, useful way, and not just as a burden or as somebody who was prone to exploding every now and then or messing up or whatever. Somebody who could be reliable, because that was important to me as a parent and as a member of a family. that I felt they needed to be reliable and consistent. So like ego is a big thing. It comes out in the work, and often in the work we're working on our ego stuff, but I don't think the work is the way to deal with ego. Like I didn't deal with my ego through my art. I dealt with it by going to counselling and by going to other forms of recovery to like learn how to be a person. And really art didn't provide a lot of that because so many artists are messed up guys, you know. Like a lot of the art that we've inherited over the last 300, 400, 500 years is by people who are completely messed up and had horrible lives and made everybody miserable, you know. That's not they don't have the answers, you know. And they make great art and it's cool stuff and everything, but like they didn't know how to be human beings, you know what I mean? I wanted to be a human being, and for me, the art stuff is how I am a human being. It's not the other way around. I'm an artist as a human being. So learning to deal with all that ego stuff, learning to, like I say, like can't focus on being helpful, focus on what does the situation need, not what do I need, using my creativity to make space for other people's creativity. That's something that really comes through the theatre because there's so much collaboration. So if you lead a theatre project, you're literally using your creative leadership to make space for other people to be really creative on your show and make that show better. And that was a core learning for me in Dramsoc was like, if I really let people do if I just give them a kind of a vision or a really good idea of what I'm trying to achieve, but like let them do stuff, they would come back with amazing things, and the show was better. And we all got a lot, you know, they could own it and really appreciate it. It wasn't just my show; it was my show, but it wasn't just my show. So that was a real lesson, like in allowing it to not be just about me. It can be about me for me, but it's not just about me for everybody else as well. Um, and that's a kind of a life lesson as well, like that, you know, in that kind of the social as an art product, you know, as something that we make and co-create. Well, then if everybody feels like it's theirs, well, then it's going to be richer and they're going to be happier and more joyful, and that feeling of the dance is going to be more there. It's going to be more alive, you know.
I think it'd just be very interesting to hear of like when you're working with different artists or creating a piece, could you maybe give us an insight into what your creative process is or what that looks like? Or does it change from piece to piece and it's like starting afresh for each project?
I've ongoing collaborations with people. So I've people that I turn to regularly for certain things, but I also have ongoing artistic kind of relationships with people where the work really comes out of the relationship as opposed to the relationship is built on us working together, if you know what I mean. And both at the same time. But like if I'm the author of the project, if I've put it together and I'm inviting people in to be part of it, but I'm setting the agenda, then I really feel it's really important for me to be really well prepared as much as I can, not over prepared, but like if there's homework to be done, that I've done it. If there's something to have been written or whatever, that it should be done and that it should be done as best as I can to that moment in time. It mightn't be finished, but like I haven't taken any shortcuts or whatever. And then like I find it's really important to be really upfront and clear about my vision or my expectation or what I'm trying to do. And the better I can hand that over, either through talking about it or demonstrating it or writing a really good draft of something or whatever it is, the better I can really give that over to people and then say to them, and then give them the kind of, whether they have particular roles or whatever, but give them a clear sense of where the scope for their input is and give them freedom then. That's what I really try to do. I really try to give people freedom, and I also set the bar quite high for myself, and I visibly set that bar high and I talk about, and I try to, like, if I'm working with people who don't have a lot of artistic experience or are new to stuff, sometimes I'll bring in other people who are a really high skill level or whatever to really show what's possible and to inspire people, you know. I like working with mixed groups. I like working with people who are really, really good at what they do. I love trying to get the absolute best out of them. I love challenging people who are really good, but I also love challenging people who are at the beginning of their artistic journey or who have less skill or experience. Because I love to see people develop and learn and discover new possibilities in themselves. And I love people being creative and coming up with stuff. And I try to then honor that as much as possible. If somebody comes in with something, as much as possible, I will try to give that a shot, you know. Somebody comes in with something, whatever, I'll say, okay, let's try it. And that's the kind of deal. There's no point in me inviting creativity and then not giving it its space. And I made some mess ups in the past where I kind of gave people creative freedom, but then I couldn't handle what they brought back. And I closed it down. And I learned from that if you're going to give people freedom, you need to be able to carry it. You need to be able to give them that space when they come back with something. But if you can handle all that, you'll get really rich work. The cleaner the confession you can make about what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, what it looks like, smells like, feels like, the cleaner you can give that away and then let it go, the richer it will come back in the end. And everything that you want will come back. And everything that you want in it will be in it. But there'll be all this other stuff as well. You know, that's my experience.
Our kind of last question we've been asking to everyone, and we're just kind of interested to see what um people think. Basically, if you have any thoughts of what the government in Ireland could do to improve the arts, or like if there's particular advice or think or like a program that maybe was here possibly in the 90s or something that was taken away but should be brought back.
Okay, well, I have two thoughts on this. One follows from the other. So the first thought is that I think the focus should be on taking away barriers to practicing art. So I'm an advocate for the basic income for artists because it takes away that fear of poverty that is a barrier to getting into your practice. They're just being more easier to access spaces to work in, just more spaces, or make it easier for people to get insurance to convert spaces, or make it easier for somebody to rent out a space in between lettings for art. It's really about taking away any of the friction. I would also give artists the free travel so that they can get around and meet each other. Yeah, insurance, I would really try and find a way to take insurance out of the equation for artists. Well, what are the other barriers? I mean, they're the main things at the moment: space, income, insurance, and travel. So if you just make those really easy to do, I think you'll get more, like the basic income is a clear example of a way to just make it easier for people to do their art without controlling what they're doing. And I really like that. I'm not a big fan of like choosing projects to fund. Like Tramsock was really ideal. Like you had a space that you didn't have to pay for. You had loads of people around who had time on their hands to do stuff because they were only students, just like as if they were on a basic income. You got a little bit of money and you could go and find more. You could go and sell ads in your program if you wanted more money to do stuff. And then you just did stuff. And we all went to see everybody's plays, so you had an audience. And that was it. And it was super creative. And loads of people got careers out of it. There was a van available if you need to fetch stuff, and you had a big shed to put all your crappy set stuff in. It was perfect, you know. Like it was a really like low key, no brainer ecosystem for letting people just get on with the business of putting on the plays, you know. And I find that I'm trying to recreate those circumstances in the larger world through the basic income and stuff like that. Like a huge shed for everybody to keep their set in, and the possibility for everybody to use everybody else's bits of set and furniture and stuff, like a huge warehouse for theatre stuff, and the county council to put on a guy who'll drive around and pick stuff up for you. Do you know, like simple stuff. The second part is that I believe everybody should be able to, just like in Dramsock, Everybody was entitled to come down and get stuck in and do stuff. And I think it should be the same in the wider art world. I think anybody who wants to pursue a creative practice, regardless of whether the Arts Council or their peers or other artists or academics or anybody else thinks what they do is absolute rubbish. If they want to paint, let them paint and let them be called a painter. And if they want to write, let them write. Let them be called a writer, even if it's absolute drivel. I really do not believe in people judging other people's work. I just don't think it's. I mean, we can discuss it, and we can generate a lot of creative energy out of arguing about it. But I don't like. I think there's an inbuilt kind of institutional, class-based snobbishness around deciding whose art is worth funding and whose isn't. And I just don't really think in a proper egalitarian 21st century multi-spectrum world that is not the way forward. If somebody wants to do it, let them do it. If they're a real artist, they'll stick at it, and if they're not, they'll fall off the wagon and go and do something else. Who cares? And if they're making absolute rubbish, who cares? It shouldn't really matter. Yeah, that's my point of view.
That is perfect. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, Jeffrey, and thank you for being so open and honest with us.
Thank you. Very much enjoyed it.